Hi, everybody. Welcome to the city's Faith and Housing Initiative Land Development 101 for faith-based organizations. I think we're just going to give it a minute or two to let folks get into the room, and then we will kick things off. All right, Liz, I see some folks are still coming in, so we'll plan to kick off here in just a minute. Does that sound good?
Yep, sounds great.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. Well, it's 12:02, so let's move into today's event. And in the efforts to maximize time today, I'll keep the introduction fairly brief. But my name is Michael Engelhardt. I am the Housing Trust Fund Manager here at the City of Charlotte. And it is my pleasure to welcome you all today to our second event in the ongoing capacity building series for faith and housing. So today's session will be on Land Development 101, so providing a high-level overview of land development and what that looks like, especially for your faith-based organization. As I mentioned, this is the second in a series of capacity building events, and there are still events to come this month and the remainder of this fall and leading into Q1 of 2025. So with that being said, I will now turn it over to today's presenter, the CEO and founder of Give Impact LLC, Liz Ward. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks so much, Michael. And can everybody see my screen? Just want to make sure. So like Michael said, I'm Liz Ward. I know many of you on this call, but there's many of you I'm still getting to know. And so just wanted to provide a quick backdrop of my background and what Give Impact is doing before we jump into today's goals and the agenda. But just a quick recap is that I've got 15 years of experience in real estate, finance, and affordable housing development. And 4 years ago, I started a firm called Give Impact that specializes on affordable housing initiatives, particularly those that focus on public-private partnerships. So we've had the benefit of being able to work with quite a few faith groups on deploying capital, land, and buildings. And so within this initiative, our current role is to help the city deploy resources to you through their Faith and Housing Initiative. And so we're focusing on three core areas you may hear me refer to, which are around connect, educate, and empower. And so this is kind of hits all of those buckets. And last week we had an in-person lunch and learn where over 50 folks came together to build connections and to engage on this topic. The recording of this event will be available online, and then we're going to host another in-person event next week on Thursday, and so we'll talk more about that at the end as a just this. So this is a continuing series, and so today, big picture. My goal is to help expose you guys to the development process. For a couple of reasons. One is it's very complex. It can take a long time. And so it's really good to make sure you understand the various steps and phases that a development goes through. But also as you explore starting to work with developers or form a development team, so you can understand the roles everybody plays and the role that you would like to play in that process. But also so you can understand the risks that are taken on and what developers are facing as they go through the process. So, I don't expect anybody to become an expert after 45 minutes, but it will give you enough to really help you understand what questions you need to be asking and to help you on this journey of learning how to take steps towards reaching your goal of providing more affordable housing and potentially within your faith community. So I also wanted to stop to mention that there are a couple handouts that we put together. So Megan is going to put a link in the chat to our Faith and Housing website with the City of Charlotte. If you scroll down under resources, there are a couple of handouts that we're going to refer to. One is a key glossary of terms. Another one is some resources to free tools that are available for land development. We'll continue to add to these as new information becomes available and as we get questions and feedback from you guys. But just know that that's out there, as well as a copy of the slides that we're going to be going through. And so next, we're going to go through big picture, what development is, who the players are, through some key terminology, because I know we throw out lots of jargon all the time on this. And then we're going to go through the different phases in the development process. And at the end, we're going to wrap up with some key considerations that faith-based organizations need to be thinking about and how to proceed to the next phase. I will stop periodically for some questions, and then we're going to try and take most of them at the end. So as you have questions, please put them in the chat. And then as we have time, we'll pause to make sure that we have a chance to interject that into the content. So first, big picture, what is development? Might seem like a silly question, but there is some confusion sometimes because out in the real world, sometimes the word development means fundraising. And so what we're specifically talking about is land development. So it's the process of taking raw land and turning it into a physical structure. And in this particular case, we're talking about residential uses. So either rental housing or for sale housing. It does also can include turning an existing building like a church into housing. And so you're taking it from one existing use to another use. And there are 7 critical phases that that folks go through when they're leading projects through the development phase. Sometimes there's a little bit of overlap between them, but going through it this way will help you understand the kind of the distinct phases and some of the core questions that have to be answered in each of those. I will also add that it can take a long time to go through these phases. We'll talk about that a little bit more at the end, and I'll give examples. But for example, Mayfield Memorial Baptist Church went through this process, and it took, let's see, they identified the site roughly around fall of 2018. And they broke ground in April of 2022. So it took about 3.5 years to get from site identification to breaking ground on the project. And then by the time it opened and finished construction, it was a total of about 5 years from this phase 1 until phase 7. Some of the things that determine how long it takes to go through the process is whether or not rezoning is involved. That particular project did require rezoning. There were also some delays due to needing to redesign some of the buildings in response to soil conditions and some title issues that arose during the process. And so there's just a myriad of moving parts in the development phase. So again, this is just to help you guys get your arms around the big picture process. If anybody attended the Faith and Housing Summit, which during the in-person session, we took like a show of hands. And so this is a little bit different in the online format. But Gwen Garnett, who worked with St. Paul Baptist, said it took them about 10 years to go through this process. The shortest I've seen from site identification to opening was about 3 years to go through the process, which was incredibly fast. That was the Mezzanine on Freedom project with Covenant Presbyterian, and they were just contributing capital, not land, although some other parties did contribute the land via ground lease. But that just gives you a concept of how long it can take to go through these processes. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So here we want to talk about who are the people that are involved in the development process. And I'm going to pause and say first that there is a different group of people that are involved in the ongoing operations of a building. And so what we're focused on here is just really trying to focus on the folks that are responsible for helping it turn from raw dirt into a physical structure. Now, there's many more people than are showed here, but when we use the term developer, these are the folks who really have the expertise in understanding how to go through the process of land development. They understand finance, they understand the legality of it, and how to get through city processes. So there's many people that come to the table that bring that varied level of expertise. But that's the role of the developer, is to shepherd that process and often to take on significant financial risk in that pursuit. The architects and engineers are the designers that are responsible for designing the project. So architects are who focus on the physical structure that you see, and the inner workings of the inside of the building. And civil engineers are responsible for the land and the infrastructure. So the roads, the sidewalks, the underground pipes, all of those kind of things. And they help you make sure you understand how traffic is going to move through the site. There's lots of intricacies when we're putting these projects together, both for sale and for rental communities. And so those design partners are really important. They also often have to know specific requirements related to funding sources. Often there are extra design requirements that can come from the state level or even the local level if you are tapping into affordable housing funds. And so it's important to have experienced teams at the table. From a construction standpoint, the most common term you'll hear is general contractors. So these are the folks that are hired by the development team to physically build and oversee the building of the structures. And so there's many different ways to contract with those general contractors to manage and mitigate risk. But you'll hear that word, and so that's primarily their role. They oversee often a group of subcontractors that have specialty focuses, such as drywall, framing, plumbing, all sorts of different things. But the general contractor is the one that kind of oversees all the different parties that are physically delivering goods to the site and delivering them within the building. Separately within the for sale space, you'll often hear the term builders. So they serve often similar to a general contractor in the rental space, but there are builders who have very specific product that they use and they repeat over and over and over again. So they've got a lot of efficiencies in their design and in their specific product. And so if you hear the term builder, often that is in the single family space that is building a repeatable product, is the most common way that term is applied. Then we move into the legality. There are attorneys who can help you with zoning and land use controls or general real estate practices and contracts. So particularly around partnership agreements. But there are also separate attorneys who really specialize in affordable housing, and they understand the intricacies of deed restrictions, of certain types of funding, such as the low-income housing tax credit, which we'll talk about in just a second. So it's just important to know if you're identifying either third-party legal representation or legal representation within your congregation or your faith organization. is to ask people what type of law they practice and to make sure that when you're developing your group, that you've got folks who have the right types of expertise based on the project you're pursuing. And the lenders and finance partners, again, there's a myriad of folks who come to the table to help build the project. There's construction lenders, there's long-term financing partners, there's local agencies like the City of Charlotte who provide housing trust fund, and we often have state agencies who participate. And so we'll share more information about these roles in the next Lunch and Learn, so that as you guys start to think about who needs to be a part of your team, you can have all that information and start to know who some of the players are, not just what they do. So we'll work on continuing to give you guys information about that. And on this one, really, I just want to point you to the handout. There's a lot of jargon used in the housing development space. And so if you have a question, that means someone else probably has a question. Do not hesitate to ask, or to ask people to abbreviate, or elaborate on what abbreviations are, because often, the term LIHTC, you'll hear that a lot. That stands for Low Income Housing Tax Credit. That is the primary funding tool that is used for rental housing. There's a lot of nuance to that. We've included that in the handout. AMI is something you hear a lot. That's area median income. That's kind of talking about, for the statistical area, what the median income is for a family of four. And then a percent of that kind of defines what different financing programs can serve different households. And so all of that is in the handout. And I encourage you guys to continue to look at that and study that and ask the questions that you have. And I am going to start to head into the phases. Megan, I want to pause and just see if there's any questions that have come in before I jump into these phases.
No questions that I've seen yet. I will, though, invite everyone to use the chat box to submit questions as they come to you. Is just fine. Harold and I will be monitoring those, and there will be a couple times where Liz pauses and we can take questions sort of as she rolls. That way she doesn't feel like she's talking to no one in this presentation. And then we will also try to save some time for questions at the end. So those are all open to you. Please use the chat box to send them to us.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. All right, so let's jump in. This is the first of the 7 phases, which is site identification. It's the most important question. Is this site actually available? We can spend time dreaming and thinking and testing all day long, but if it's not available, it's a moot point. And so that's one of the first questions developers ask is, does the landowner actually have interest in conveying the land for development, and under what means? Are they interested in like selling it outright, or is there a ground lease? What is that going to look like, or is there a partnership opportunity? And particularly within the faith organizations, it's important to know who controls that decision making, who within your organization needs to be involved to make those decisions, and identify that really early on. And it's different for each faith organization. And so I encourage folks to talk about that both within their individual organization and if you're part of a broader organization, to work with those parties to identify what's needed. And then within that, you're going to need support, congregational support. And so it's really important to understand, if we're going to pursue this, are folks on board? Are you going to get support for this? And you don't have to know all of that at the very beginning, but it does make a tremendous difference in how quickly and easily you move through the process. The organizations that have chosen to go down this path, that have gone through it most successfully, are ones that have really pursued this with conviction and have, come together as a body to say, this is what we want to do. This is why we want to do it. And we're going to move through this process. And so it's really important to ask these questions up front. And then I'm going to lead this first question, which is how much land is it? We're going to talk about that in just a second on the second slide. So, first is what do you have, and who's going to need to be involved on your side to make the decision to actually engage and pursue a development plan. Phase 2 is what can you actually do with it? It's the feasibility study. And I will tell you that developers are inherently creative. And so when they are given an opportunity to look at land parcel that's available, they immediately go into this creation mode and thinking about all the different opportunities and things that they see. And oftentimes different developers see different opportunities. And so many churches have used something called an RFP process, which is a request for proposal, where you kind of put out the land opportunity and say, this is what we have available. These are our goals. This is the information we do have about our land. Come bring us your ideas. That is a really great way to get different ideas from the community, from the development community on what's possible on your site. We can talk a little bit more about some nuances and considerations if you decide to go through that process. But some of the questions they're going to be asking are around 4 main categories. The first one is physical. What can you physically build? And this is around identifying how much land you have, what some of the physical features are of it, like topography, trees, points of ingress and egress, and whether it's got a stream going through it or a body of water, those kind of things. Those are the physical site evaluations. And I'm going to refer here to, there's a handout that we mentioned earlier that's on the website that is has a list of some free tools. Often the first one I use is Polaris, which is the Mecklenburg County GIS system. It's very easy to use. We are planning on posting a YouTube video to help you kind of quickly get some ideas on how to use that to better understand your parcels. And so we'll follow up with that. But the second category is legal and regulatory constraints. Is, okay, I might be able to physically build something, but do I legally have the right to do it? And so that comes down to zoning, which is around land use. And in our area, City of Charlotte, if you're within the City of Charlotte, that zoning comes from the city level. And second is survey and title. Survey is, they legally tell you where your physical property boundaries are, whether or not there's any easements on your property, whether it's a vehicular easement, a right-of-way for future road expansions, right-of-way for, or an easement for power lines or sewer. There's all sorts of different things that can be underneath the ground that you may not physically see, but a survey would uncover that. And the title insurance is really important because that tells you, do you have actual legal right to make decisions about this property? Sometimes there are issues in what we call the chain of title, where something wasn't conveyed correctly, or there may even be restrictions. So deed restrictions that say you're only allowed to build XYZ under this parcel. So it's really important to know that's all stuff that's public record. An attorney is the one that will help you really identify all of these things. And so, for example, many years ago, back in the 50s or so, when a lot of these subdivisions were being built out, there are regulations that say you can only build a single-story, single-family home with XYZ characteristics. That's very common. And it's important to work with an attorney that understands which of those restrictions that are in place that are still enforceable and which ones may be on the record but are not actually enforceable. That's something that an attorney can help you with. There's also environmental factors you have to take into consideration. And there's consultants that can help you understand that. So that's the second category. The third category is, okay, I may physically be able to build this. I may legally be able to build this, but is there a demand for the product that I want to build? Who am I serving and in what way? And so, many times, it came up last week. There was a discussion around intentional mixed income communities, which I personally am a huge fan of. But you do have to make sure you understand the demand in that particular area, and can I achieve the rents that I need to achieve to make my project viable? And what's the depth of the demand for a particular target market? And so that's all part of the analysis, really important to understand. And then you kind of put all three of these together. But the fourth one is the linchpin. It's um, it's the financial feasibility. It's really trying to understand, can I raise enough money based on what I can charge and what it's going to cost me to build this product? Can I source all the funds that is going to make this project get off the ground? And so that's a combination of understanding all the different financial tools, as well as the ongoing operations if it's going to be a rental property, and balancing all of those things. So these are the specialties that developers understand, all of these four different silos. And hopefully the handout that we provided will help you start to kind of understand some of the free tools you have available as you start to think through who you want to serve on your site and whether or not that's possible. I'm going to go through this slide and then we'll pause for some more questions. So the next phase is, okay, I've found a site that's available. I think I generally know what I can build on the site, build and finance on this site. Now we're going to take it a further step and we're going to figure out how we design and plan this community and get it through all the proper channels so that we can have the permits needed to physically build this building. And so what I'm showing here on this slide is that, kind of somewhere in that feasibility phase, you're doing some initial concept planning. This might be hand sketching. This might be just kind of verifying your developable area on a free tool like Polaris, and using a what we call like a Lego model of like taking building blocks of other existing buildings and kind of putting them down and seeing kind of conceptually what you think you might be able to get. Once you kind of have an idea of what that looks like and decide to move forward, then you go through the process of, if you need zoning, the design team can help you, and they're right there alongside you as you move through the zoning process to make sure that once you get something zoned, you actually can build it within what you're agreeing to. And then it takes it a step further to what we call schematic designs. These are often needed for our funding applications for affordable housing. They're needed when applying to the City of Charlotte or to the state agency, which is NCHFA. And so the intent here is to be able to show with reasonable certainty that you can deliver a certain amount of units and what that quality is going to look like, what that community feel is going to be like. And so it's still kind of an early stage design process where you're kind of going through iterations to make sure it works before you commit to going through a full permit set. This can be expensive. It's an investment and it's well worth it. But it's really important to know that if you're designing a rental community, that entering into the permitting phase is very detailed, lots and lots of different versions of designs, and it gets expensive. So it requires a lot of investment. This is where the developers have expertise. They have sources of funding, pre-development capital that comes in to help pay for going through this process. And it's not something that a lot of faith-based organizations are choosing to fund. So it's important to just understand the process and that a lot of capital is required to get really into detailed permitting and designs. And the architects and civil engineers, all of that team stays involved through the construction process. They are there just to make sure that the plans are being implemented in accordance to what they drew. And they work closely with the inspectors that are coming in during the process. And so they're in there all the way until the very end. I'm going to pause here for questions. Megan, is there anything?
We haven't seen any questions in the chat yet, but I do have some questions that were submitted before the webinar when people registered.
Okay.
So I will pose one or two of those, and some of them may be better answered by Michael, some better answered by you. I will ask for those listening, I just want to make sure the chat feature is working and you guys have powers to submit questions. So if somebody could submit a sample question or just say like, yes, I can type in the chat box. I want to make sure that that's working. Otherwise it'll be a very quiet call. Michael, maybe you can answer
Thanks,
this.
Leslie.
Oh, thank you, Leslie and John. Enter your questions in the chat box and we'll get to them. We had one question submitted before this seminar started that said, how are we tracking progress on the number of homes that have been set as affordable in Charlotte? Michael, can you take that one?
Yeah, sure thing. I think there's multiple ways that this is being tracked. But I mean, first and foremost, if they're city funded, they are within our portfolio of investments that we have made at the Housing Trust Fund. And so from there, we have an asset management team on the back end that is tracking those units as they are brought online. So it's kind of a multi-phase tracking process, right? So while they're under development, they're being tracked by myself and some other staff who are, monitoring construction progress and what have you. And then once they're actually completed and brought into the market, those are then tracked by our asset management team who ensure that they're complying with what was proposed in the initial application and through the loan agreements, through the restrictive covenants and what have you. So yeah, there's a number of ways. And in another way is there's kind of a backstop here, if you think about it, in terms of if they have been funded by tax credits. And so if they have been funded by tax credits, they're immediately part of state monitoring as well as federal monitoring through the IRS for the tax credits go. So there's a number of layers of monitoring that go into it and ensuring that the units that have been proposed and funded are actually being produced and set aside for the families who are eligible for them. So great question.
Great. I also, while we're waiting to see if we've got one more question, is that we are continuing to work on trying to put together some tools to help faith-based organizations in this visioning process. And so we're exploring maybe some small, design charrette concepts. We're also working through some ideas on providing you guys with some templates of things to help you kind of go through the process. And so stay tuned and continue to let us know what questions you have or what you need to go through the process, because that helps us in thinking about how we can deploy resources to you. And some of the questions I may need to wait. Let me get through this next section. Y'all continue to send your questions in and then we'll pause. Because I just want to make sure that we finish this and leave more space for questions at the end. Okay, so we've gone through phase 1 through 3, and then I went ahead and jumped ahead to 5 and 6 for planning. So keep that in mind. So we're going to jump to phase 4. I intentionally am only having the name of the categories. In a second, you'll see me. I'm going to drop in some keywords underneath this, but the next phase is securing the funding. And so there's a lot of moving parts to this. And so it's important to keep in mind that when a developer sends you a pro forma, so pro forma, that word means it is a financial picture of what the project is going to cost. And so often you'll see a sources and a uses. A sources is all the different sources of funding you're using, and then all the uses such as land cost, hard cost, And so that's one of the things that you'll see. All of these components on the screen are what you would see in a financial pro forma that they would give you. It's, some people will call it a budget, but it's actually all four of these items. And so the cost to develop, that's a combination of the land, the hard costs, the soft cost, and developer fees that are required to build the project. And so it can slightly vary depending on, not slightly, it can vary widely based on the type of product that's being built and whether it's rental or single family. Rental often will include operating reserves, but those are not often included in for sale because you're selling it to an end user right away. And then in the second bucket, operating income is a big consideration for rental properties. Again, this doesn't apply if you're going to be selling the units, although that it does play into a factor if you've got an HOA, because that HOA needs to make sure it's set up to be sustainable, that there's dues coming in to help cover common area expenses. But really, when I was putting this slide together, I was thinking about rental communities and thinking about, how much are we charging for the unit that they're going to live in? What is the cost of operating that building? And what's the difference between the two? And depending on who you're choosing to serve within the housing spectrum, that delta, the difference between, what you can charge for that unit, what it costs to operate it, really makes it a big difference in determining how much money you can borrow to build that building, and then how much additional subsidy funding you need from local and state sources or private sources in order to make that vision happen. And so in a second, I'm going to show you some of the terms, but I didn't want to get you guys super overwhelmed. And I wanted to show you guys, actually, I'm going to go ahead and show you the next slide. So you can see these are all the pieces. And so you can see under cost to develop, I already walked through these major terms. Soft cost, this is also in the glossary, but you'll hear this. The word hard cost means sticks and bricks, basically, and the infrastructure work to put in roads, sidewalks, all that kind of stuff. So it's the physical things that you see moving around on a site to make a building happen. The soft costs are all the fees that you have to pay to designers and for third-party reports and for financing partners to put all the mechanisms in place for this to happen. And so just know that those are the terms between the hard costs and soft costs. And developer fees, I've outlined this in the glossary. This is really important. There's a tremendous amount of risk in taken on in building these projects and operating them. And so in order to entice developers to do this, they need to be paid, and that is through what's called a developer fee. So it covers a combination of their overhead, so the staffing that's required to help shepherd through, deals through the process, as well as to compensate them for the risk that they're taking to shepherd the process and provide financial support and financial guarantees, as well as compensation for their creativity and the knowledge that they bring to combine all of these factors to create value. And so it's normal that they charge a developer fee. There are often industry standards on what can be charged. And so you can always ask those questions saying, is this normal? Is this the right amount? And my recommendation, I put this in the glossary, is you just want to be careful on projects at the very beginning. You don't want developers to have to defer too much of their fee. You want them to get paid for the risk that they're taking and to still have room to address risks that the project may encounter during construction. And so that might be a 202 level, but I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of that. And on the debt side, I wanted to make sure we talked about the term first mortgage. Think about this as your home. it's the person who is providing the primary source of lending, and it's in first position, meaning it's got the lowest risk of all the different lenders. And then in the city of Charlotte, if you're doing a rental property, typically the city of Charlotte comes in behind that first mortgage. So it's a loan. People have to pay this back. It's not a grant. The money has to be paid back, and it's secured by the real estate. But they're willing to go into the second position. There's other funding sources, like faith communities have been able to come in and provide a third or a fourth mortgage. Like we talked about during the summit, Covenant Presbyterian came in and provided a $2 million loan to a project at below market terms in a fourth position mortgage, and that helped make that vision of that project happen. Many other examples that are going on in the city where they've been able to provide those type of subordinate low-cost loans to help enable deeper targeting or to serve a wide variety of individuals within a community. And so wanted to make sure that you guys saw that. And then on the equity side, developers often are required to bring their own cash. That's what equity means, their cash to the table. But in the rental community, the primary tool that is used as equity is called tax credit equity. It's a special program that's designed for affordable housing, and large banks like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Fifth Third, these groups will come in and they'll buy this tax credit equity and invest. That's one of the ways that they do community investment. It is not the only tool. There are many other types of equity that go into rental development deals, but that's probably one of the most common. And we can come back to this. I realize that's big picture, but I wanted to make sure you guys were exposed to, these are all the levers that developers are trying to balance to make a deal feasible.
Liz,
and
we
so-
have
yeah.
We have one question about specifically about tax credit financing. It's really more about preserving existing affordable units, but kind of on that vein, Allie asked, are there any tools to see when properties are about to lose their low-income housing tax credit status and potentially become market rate units?
That is a great question.
I
I
can
don't
jump
know.
in. Up.
Yeah, go for it, Michael.
Yeah, so I was going to say, so I mean, typically what you'd want to do is go to the NCHFA website, which has a list of the awarded projects by county, and so you can search by county, by year, and then from there you'll typically want to look for like a 30-year lag period, right? So if you're interested in developments that are going to be coming off of the tax credit rolls in 2025, for instance, you'd probably want to look around the 1993 to 1995 range of developments that were awarded tax credits. And that'll give you a rough idea of when those developments are available. And I think, Liz, you just dropped in the link I was going to drop in. So perfect.
It's spot on. That's the only thing I could think of that is a regular tool, is to be able to see, you would go there. Think about this. So if you're going to look for those properties to try and see when they might be converting, if they were funded through NCHFA, that means that they signed on for an initial 15-year compliance period and an additional 15-year compliance period. So it's a total of 30 years. And most often that is how long a project's restrictions will be in place. There are, if for some reason the property is having operating difficulties, there are some avenues for primarily through foreclosure or other things where those restrictions could get wiped out. I am not aware of that happening in North Carolina, but it is something to be aware of nationally. But so you typically want to look at that 30-year period from when it was on this list. Ultimately, the guiding source is going to be if you find a property and you're wanting to check, or if you happen to have ownership in a property and you want to see when the affordability is up, there will be a recorded document that's called a deed restriction or a land use restrictive covenant. And you want to look at the year that those went into effect. And so that's a core thing to be able to look at. So that's a great question.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Michael.
I'm going to
On-
link
on-
that. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just on time, we have around 15 minutes left. So I want to suggest that we've gotten some big picture questions, Michael, about kind of city focus with policy. I'm going to suggest we hold those till the end. And Liz, if you want to keep going and get to the part on roles and risks, and then we'll come back to these other questions. So if you submitted a question, we see it, we're coming.
Yep.
Does that sound okay?
That sounds great. Sounds great. And so this is phase 7. So we went through identifying the land, doing your initial feasibility study. We went through design and planning, securing the funding and permitting. And so in total to reach phase 7, like I gave an average of 3 to 5 years to reach unit completion. It can take much longer than this. And so here on the slide, you can see phases 1 through 5, which is before you begin construction, on average can take 18 to 36 months. If you are clear on your vision, what you want to do, and you pick a partner and you kind of hit the ground running. For churches who are, or faith organizations, it doesn't have to be a church. This is, all inclusive, where there are many different faith organizations that are wanting to be a part of this. It can take some time to go through the discernment process of deciding, is your site available? Do you want to go through this process? And so just keep in mind, as you're thinking about how long you're giving to that process, that it's going to take some time for a project to be verified as feasible and to get out of the ground. So just keep that in mind, that it doesn't just happen overnight. Single family projects can happen a lot faster, but still, even with larger single family communities, it can take quite a bit of time to get through the permitting phases. And so, the smaller the project, the faster it can probably move through this. But in general, these are probably going to give you a good idea of how long it takes. And I think one of the things I was able to talk about in the in-person session last week is, because it can take so long, it's really important that you feel convicted about what you're going through, and that you pick a partner that is aligned with your values and your vision. And so we're going to talk more about that in the session next week. But I've worked on many of these deals, and I can tell you from personal experience that it is worth all the blood, sweat, and tears you put into this. It is so meaningful to get to a grand opening day where you're celebrating and you're, seeing residents get access to their keys and to be a part of a community. It is worth it. And that's what drives the developers in this space to keep doing it over and over and over again, because we celebrate those moments. And it is just really, really special to see that type of community collaborating together to create something for the community. It's a very special process, and it can be very joyful. And so, given the fact that our audience are all faith-based folks, I encourage you to lean into the spiritual components of going through this process. It takes time, but use this time to work together as a team and to follow as you are feeling called to do so. And it can be a really, really joyful experience. So on the next slide is, is anybody brain overwhelmed? I tried to simplify this as much as possible, but I want you guys to have a takeaway that there's a lot of moving parts in the development process. It's not simple. And so sometimes when you're wondering why it can take a developer, so long to get back to you, or why it's going to take so long to get through the process, it's just because there's a lot of moving parts. It's complex. It's really important to have people on your team who are committed and really understand all the moving pieces. And so before we move into the next phase, I want to give everybody a chance to breathe. And if you're feeling overwhelmed by the amount of information I just threw at you, take a deep breath. And we're going to lead into what you guys do with this information now. What are some of the key considerations for faith-based organizations? And so the core thing that I could advise you to think about is leading with your vision. What is your motivation? Who are you seeking to serve? Think about the things that are laid on your heart. It's okay that it's different than someone else. Find the thing that gets you excited, and gets your group, your organization, that you can collectively come together around. And it's really important in this space to make sure that you're not leading with fear, that a fear of a lack of resources, a fear of certain things is your driving force. Put that to the side, call them out when you see them, and put it to the side and try and make sure that you're focusing on leading with positive intention, and that your team is pulling together around a common vision, and that you're opening yourself up to all that is possible. And then in the second one is set your expectations. I feel like I've talked about this over and over and over again, but it's really important so everybody knows it takes time. You have to have patience, and it's okay to set expectations and deadlines and hold people's feet to the fire. But just know that it takes time, and land development has risks. And so that's why it's really important to understand where you fit into the process. You may, if you have land and you're wanting to engage in this, it's important for you to decide, do you want to be a part of taking the risks in the development process, or do you just want to contribute the land and pick a partner who can really take the rest of the ball and run with it? That is an option. Some churches and different faith groups and congregations and organizations are deciding to play a role in some of those risks. But you need to make sure you understand what those are. So we're going to go quickly through risks, resources, and roles, and then I'm going to pause in like 2 minutes so we can open it back up for questions. And so I'm going to skip over to this. So the risks that you're willing to participate in, oftentimes there's financial risks. So there's pre-development capital, construction funding that's required, guarantees for borrowing money to construct these buildings, and ongoing obligations with operations with rentals. And so the faith organizations really need to decide, are any of these risks that you're willing to take? Or do you need to pick a partner who's willing to do that and can demonstrate their capacity to do that? I think really some of the core questions come down to control. Faith organizations often want to have an element of approval over concept and design, clarity on who's being served, and that can't be shifted without having a seat at the table and controls. Or if it's being built on your campus, long-term rights regarding community quality and shared spaces, and who's taking care of those things, who's paying for them, who's maintaining them. And of course, if you're including housing, thinking about the affordability periods. What is the minimum commitment to keep units affordable, and what can happen to them in the future? Those are really important things for faith organizations to be thinking about. And outside of money and control, it's relationships. You are part of a community, and so you often have deep relationships in those communities, making sure you're thinking about how folks are engaging in those relationships, playing a role in that, and also making sure you're managing internal dynamics, and communication within your own organization, and making sure that's nice and clear. So once you determine which risks you're willing to take on, that can lead you into identifying what resources you have available. I'm not going to spend any time on this, but this is, in the slide deck, we can come back to it. But this is just kind of showing there's a teetering balance between, the pursuit costs, and the control of the land. And these are just all the different pieces that often folks are trying to wrestle through. Understand your resources. And so do you have capital? And if you don't, the city is working really hard to try and identify what resources we can help you navigate, either through free public resources or through obtaining professional services that may be able to be rolled out next year. But it's important for you guys to identify, do you have capital within your organization? And or do you have the capacity to raise capital through folks? We've seen lots of powerful examples of people coming together over a common purpose. Everybody brings a little bit to the table, and it really is enough to really make a meaningful difference. Understanding the people you have within your organization, folks who are willing to serve as committee members. Maybe you have internal folks who are members of your organization that have experience in real estate or experience in law, or experience in one of these other aspects that we've talked about, and can help you internally with your committee and or advising you in the process, and making sure that you've got people who are advocating for the work that you're going through internally. And then, of course, understanding what land or buildings that you guys have that you're interested in leveraging. And then the last one is around your role. And the main thing I want you guys to walk away with here is it's really important to communicate, especially in this early phase that you might be in. Write down your vision, use internal memos, PowerPoint presentations, get really clear on what is the definition of success for you guys before you start taking steps to engage with a partner. Make sure that's written down. And then as you start to work with partners, obtain written proposals, get a memorandum of understanding, which is it's a non-binding document, but it kind of spells out big picture to make sure the parties are on the same page, so that as you move through the process, if people change or if so much time passes that you just can't remember, you can go back and refer to those documents and make sure you can use those to get back on track. But it's so important to find partners that you trust folks, but it's okay to verify, make sure you're getting the information that you need to feel good about a decision. If you've got questions or concerns, always raise your hand. But just know that there's a lot of parties in this process, and your organization may just be one of many, and so it's important to just understand the complexity of all the people that are involved. So I'm going to pause. That's it. That's the end of the slides, and want to give a chance to go through questions. I know we're right at the end.
Thanks, Liz. We've got a couple good questions, but some of them I know we're going to answer next week. Can you flip to the slide about the next session? And
yes.
I will invite people to, if you haven't submitted questions yet, you have them, please drop them in the chat now. And then Liz, one of the questions we got prior to the webinar was from Elizabeth. She said, how do we share our proposals for consideration? I assume she means from developers and others. And how do we receive guidance to fundraise for capital?
Proposals for you mean in terms of if you're wanting to put out an RFP to the community, how does it get out?
I think that's the question.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's not something that the city has yet talked about facilitating. I will say that's something Give Impact has done in the past to help our clients do that. I've also seen folks do like a direct invitation of if you've interviewed or talked with a couple of development partners, you can put together a list of folks and just email them directly. It just depends on how wide of an audience you want it to go to. And so that's something that we can kind of think through as a takeaway item is there a way for, to make sure we're thinking through how to get you guys resources on putting that out, or guidance on that.
Liz, can you explain what the next session, Land Development 102, will cover? And then Michael, maybe after
yes.
that, you can share what else the city has in the works that will be coming next year.
Yep. So next week, we're still fine tuning the content as folks have asked different questions and asked for different things to be covered. But of course, today was to try and make sure that folks have a baseline understanding of the many different steps and the complexity of the development process. And then next week is to be able to kind of do a deeper dive on the different parties in our community who are part of the development process, and a deeper understanding of how to discern who the right partner might be, and the information you might need to gather in that phase. And so that's talking about the RFP process, I think is something that we should add to the agenda for next week, so we can go deeper on that.
Yeah, and then Megan, as you alluded to, so plans in the future for the city regarding the RFP specifically. So one of the goals of the RFP that's being released is to build a cohort-style capacity building program for the various faith institutions, faith communities that are interested in taking part, right? And so as part of that RFP, there's also an RFQ for technical experts who will be able to provide technical assistance along the way, and sort of be in a pool of experts that folks can reach out to for that sort of capacity assistance and to be part of the capacity building program. So that's what's in the works currently. And yeah, Liz, anything else that we should highlight from upcoming events?
No, I mean, I guess just want to make sure people know too that the lunch and learn next week, we're following that it's going to be in person, and then subsequent to that there will be an online version. And so for each of these lunch and learns we're rolling out, we're trying to do an in-person version so people can have the chance to network, be with other people, and then we can kind of do a dry run on the content and see what kind of questions folks have. And then we're doing the second one online so that we can record it and make it part of the permanent library for folks who weren't able to attend. And so we'll be following that format and continuing to roll out additional lunch and learns. So as we go through this, if there's certain topics or ideas that you have for what we should cover, please send those to us, because that would be really important. And I don't know, Megan, if you are okay with putting your email in the chat, if folks have ideas or questions about that. Megan is serving as the project manager for this initiative with Give Impact. And so she's a great person to reach out to.
Christina asked if there's a list of organizations that faith communities can reach out to for assistance, maybe in advance of the other program that the city is building up, Michael, that you mentioned. So Christina, I put in the chat, but for anybody else who's looking for it, there is a published directory of it's broad. It's all stakeholders in the faith and housing space in Charlotte. So that includes other faith communities that are on this journey that either have done it before or might be looking to partner. It includes professionals, developers and architects and other professionals who are really invested in this. And then some public servants as well. And so that's all in the directory that is posted on the city's faith and housing web page. And if you're in the webinar today, you can find that in the chat as well.
But I will also say that that's something that we are trying to increase clarity and access to that information, both for the benefit of all the faith organizations who are exploring this work, but also for the folks that are working for those organizations. It's they've got a lot on their plate. They are constantly trying to move initiatives forward, and they want to be a part of this. We're just trying to make sure, how do we make sure we elevate their work, but also give a better and more clear pathway to understanding what it is that each of them do, so that you can make sure that you're getting to the right person faster. So we're working on trying to pull together some documents that will help you on that pathway.
Michael, at the top of the meeting, we had some big picture questions that people submitted about just the city's leadership on more affordable housing in general, and particular questions about like what resources are available if people want to engage. Is there any guidance you can offer on how to navigate city assistance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, one of the things I would highly recommend is being part of our mailing list for informational and funding opportunities. And so as we have information available to share on those, it'll be available. Of course, we have an upcoming bond this November for affordable housing. And as part of that, I believe a portion of those funds are being set aside for a number of different initiatives, including some of the work in faith and housing. So yeah, I would stay tuned, stay connected with the city's announcements and information, and yeah, as information comes available, we will be sharing it. So yeah.
Great. I haven't seen any additional questions come in. Liz, do you want to offer any final thoughts?
I will just say that I am incredibly grateful for each and every person who has joined this call and joined the Lunch and Learn last week, and just encouraged by the number of groups that are raising their hand to explore this work. And so it is it's really exciting. And so we're looking forward to continuing to roll out more resources to you to help you kind of on this pathway, and look forward to anybody who can join next week. Oh, Megan, do we want to remind folks that particularly for the in-person session next week, we are really intending that to be for faith-based organizations. We've been super grateful that a lot of our design and development partners have been able to attend these sessions and have been really engaged, but I think we were hoping to create a space for next Thursday's in-person meeting where folks can really feel comfortable asking, lots of questions that they might not otherwise feel comfortable asking in front of developers.
The hope is that next Thursday's session, which is Thursday, October 24th, is really for faith-based and community groups who want to embark on this work. And that will be hosted at the 658 Center at Project 658, which is on Central Avenue, right near the intersection of Central and Eastway. So registration for that is open, and we hope you guys can come.
Yeah, and I will just close with feedback. We would love feedback if there's content that you would like to see in that wasn't covered today, or things that you would like to add to the handouts that we've provided. Please continue to let that feedback roll in so that we can make adjustments and continue to improve everyone's access to information.
Great. Thanks so much, Liz. Thank you, Michael.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Thank you to
Thank you,
everybody
everybody.
who's joined.